Today we will be discussing SEN support in schools. The definition of SEN. Special educational needs, SEN, is a term that is used to describe the needs of children who have a learning difficulty or disability that requires more provision to be made for them than most other children of the same age. It can also be referred to as SEND, special educational needs and disability. A child or young person has SEN if they have a learning difficulty or disability which calls for special education provision to be made for him or her. A child of compulsory school age or a young person has a learning difficulty or disability if he or she has a significantly greater difficulty in learning than the majority of others of the same age, or they have a disability which prevents or hinders him or her from making use of the facilities of a kind generally provided for others of the same age in mainstream schools or mainstream post-16 institutions. SEND, Additional Needs. Chapter 6 of the SEN Code of Practice 2015 deals with the actions that mainstream schools, including mainstream academies, should take to meet their duties in relation to identifying and supporting children with SEN. Special educational provision in schools is called SEN Support. Where a pupil is identified as having SEN, schools should take action to remove barriers to learning and put effective special educational provision in place. All schools are required to publish their SEN information report on their website. This will explain what the school does to identify special educational needs and disability and the support the school provides for children and young people who need additional help. Best endeavours. If a registered pupil or a student at a school or other institution has special educational needs, the appropriate authority must, in exercising its functions in relation to the school or other institution, use its best endeavours to secure that the special educational provision called for by the pupils or students' special educational needs is made. That's a section from Section 36 of the Children and Families Act 2014, the law. Using best endeavours means doing everything they can to meet the child or young person's SEN. These duties apply to all children with SEN. Quality first teaching. Most children and young people have their needs met in a mainstream setting, school or college. In schools and colleges, there is an expectation that all children, including those with special educational needs, receive a universal offer of high quality teaching. This is sometimes called Wave 1 offer or Quality First Teaching. The SEN Code of Practice states high quality teaching differentiated for individual pupils is the first step in responding to pupils who have or may have SEN. So what does this mean? Lessons should be highly focused with sharp objectives. Teachers should have high demands of pupil involvement and engagement with learning. There should be high levels of interaction for all pupils. Lessons should have appropriate use of questioning, modelling, explaining. There should be an emphasis on learning through dialogue. This might be modified for children who have a special educational need. There is also a link on this slide to the Camden video where they explain quality first teaching in Camden. Where there are concerns about a child's development and or attainment not being as anticipated, it is expected that staff in schools and settings will work in collaboration with parents and, where they have capacity with young people themselves, to agree how needs will be appropriately identified and assessed in a timely way. The child and the parent should be at the centre of the process, taking account of their feelings, views, wishes, their aspirations. Here is just a diagram on a whole school approach where the child or young person with SEN is in the centre and everything else is built around them to support their needs. So the class or subject teacher would be the first point of call. Then you have the SENCO with the overarching responsibility. And then there are wider support specialist expertise that schools can call upon, such as speech and language, educational psychologists, and so on. What support is available? So they have school resources. Schools will have their own resources that they are expected to use to support your child in school without the need of an education, health and care plan. So they could put special programs, use of different equipment, give individual support, particular interventions, or use a combination of strategies. They can also call on external professionals to provide assessments and recommendations for support of your child. Examples of these could be specialist teachers, occupational therapist, educational psychologist, a GP or health professional, physiotherapist, speech and language therapist, CAMS. But there are other professionals that can be called upon as well. The graduated approach is a 4-point cycle that plans and reviews special educational provision and the progress towards outcomes of your child. The first stage in this is to assess the child. So you're gathering information, assessing that information and understanding more about the child's needs and the support that they should require. Then you plan the support, plan clear outcomes with the young person or child and parent carer. Again, remembering back to our earlier slide, the child should be at the centre and all of the discussions should be taking place with the child and the parent. You are part of this process. We then put that support in place. We do it. So all the strategies and provision is put in place and then we see if that's effective or not. We then move on to the review stage where we monitor and review that progress and then see, are they achieving their outcomes? At the review point, we might decide that particular intervention isn't working, therefore we might tweak it or change it, and then we will try the cycle again to see if that's making any steps towards progress for the child. Normally, schools would do this a few times to ensure that they've used all of their resources in order to support the child. So what should schools do? They can have their own approach for record keeping. It does not have to be called an IEP, an individual education plan. It could be a support plan. Schools are able to call them what they want. But it should be accurate and up to date. It should record the outcomes, the action and the support agreed through the discussion with the parent and child, which should be kept and shared with all of the appropriate school staff so that they are aware of how this child should be supported. This record should also be given to the pupil's parents. The views of the child and young person must be included if they're able to. Schools should be talking to parents regularly to set the clear outcomes and to review the progress towards them. Again, part of that graduated approach. These discussions should be taking place with parents at least 3 times a year. They should be a formal discussion rather than, here is a support plan, can you sign it? You should be part of that process. Smart outcomes. Again, we go back to the schools holding that early discussion with the pupil and parents, recording and copying to parents the outcomes which are agreed and the next steps to achieve those outcomes. The outcomes or targets should be SMART. SMART means they are specific. There is no room for misinterpretation. They are measurable. In order to chart progress, we need to have a measurable outcome. How can we measure that? What arrangements are we going to agree on how to measure the progress. They should be attainable. The outcome should be realistic and manageable. There is no point in setting an outcome that you know the child will never be able to attain, or by trying to attain that, it puts so much pressure on the child. It should be relevant to the child or young person's needs or the subjects that they are taking. And it should be time bound. There should be a time frame for reviewing. If something is not working, let's change it. Don't sit there using the same things when we know it's not working, it's not helping the child to make progress. SEN Code of Practice 2015. I've added some sections here on SEN support taken from Chapter 6 of the SEN Code of Practice. Schools should assess the pupil's needs, plan appropriate support, do what has been planned, and review the pupil's progress in response to support. 6.44. The school should obtain a wide range of evidence, including the views and experience of parents, the pupil's own views, and, if relevant, advice from external support services. Schools should take seriously any concerns raised by a parent. Section 6.45. The assessment, and not just the support, should be reviewed regularly. Section 6.46. Where outside professionals in education, health or care are not already working with school staff, the SENCO should contact them only if the parents agree. Section 6.47. Where it is decided to provide a pupil with SEN support, the parents must be formally notified, and the teacher and the SENCO should agree in consultation with the parent and pupil the adjustments, interventions and support to be put in place, as well as the expected impact on progress, development or behaviour, along with a clear date for review. Section 6.48. All teachers and support staff who work with the pupil should be made aware of their needs, the outcomes, the support provided, and the strategies or approaches that are required. This should also be recorded in the school's information recording system, and that's section 6.49. Resources. All mainstream schools are provided with resources to support those with additional needs, including pupils with SEN and disabilities. Most of these resources are determined by a local funding formula, which is also applied to local academies. School and academy sixth forms receive an allocation based on a national funding formula. Schools have an amount identified within their overall budget called the notional SEN budget. This is not a ring-fenced amount, and it is for the school to provide high quality, appropriate support from the whole of its budget. There are 3 levels or elements of funding for educational support for children and young people with special educational needs. Here is a diagram showing the funding available in Camden, and we will look into this in more detail in the next slide. Here we talk about the elements in a bit more detail. Element 1 funding, the provision for every child and young person on roll in early year setting, school or college. It pays for the school building, the class teachers, etc. Element 2 funding is part of the budget in schools and further education settings that is especially for children with additional needs, including special educational needs and disabilities. The government has said that a mainstream school or college has up to £6,000 to spend on each child with additional needs from within the school or settings budget, if they need extra help to be able to make progress. This is sometimes called delegated funding. In Camden, the local authority has ensured that all Camden nursery, primary and secondary schools, including free schools and academies, have more than the first £6,000 element 2 funding, so they can make provision up to £11,000 for pupils where their assessments show that they need that level of support without the need to access the top-up funding through an EHC plan. Element 3 funding. If the child or young person with special educational needs or disabilities has been receiving the early support but not making sufficient progress, it is possible they will need access to element 3 or the top-up funding. So where should our focus of discussion be when we meet with the school? Rather than focus on what funding has or has not been granted, discussions with schools should centre around the progress towards the outcomes of the special educational provision in place. Is the child or young person making progress towards their outcomes? Yes, discussions could be around why this provision is working. What does this tell us about the child or young person? Can we incorporate the success of this provision into other areas? If they're not making progress, then the discussion should be around how to adapt or change the provision. If it's not working, try something else. If the child or young person has achieved their outcome, are there any new outcomes we can work towards? Should the school refer to external professionals at this point, educational psychologists, speech and language, occupational therapy, etc.? What would that entail? When to expect contact? Will they write a report and a copy be circulated to the school and parent? What is the purpose of the referral? Are there clear review dates? All of these should be the focus of your discussions. I've provided some useful links here which can provide you with further information and resources. There's the SEN Code of Practice 2015, a link to the Children and Families Act 2014, which is the law overarching all of the special educational needs and disability. The SEND local offer. This is a link to the website in Camden, which is a directory of all things SEND. And there's also a link to IPSI, the independent provider of special education advice, as they provide lots of resources and information for parents that you might find useful. SENDIAS contact details can be found here. Our office telephone number is 0207 974 6264. Please be advised we have a 5-day callback, but we will endeavour to return your call as soon as possible. I've also given the link to our website where you can find further resources and information. Thank you.